Welcome back to Axis of Truth on JNS. I'm Emily Schrader, and in today's episode, we'll be talking all things Australia and what a week it has been. With the Australian government giving the Islamic Republic the boot, the recent announcement of support for a Palestinian state, and of course, rising anti-Semitism. We'll also chat with journalist and speaker Erin Molan from Australia about all the latest. But first, let's talk sanctions. I know, fun stuff, right? But seriously, this is really important right now. Last week, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom, the E3, triggered the snapback mechanism at the United Nations. Now, on paper, that should be a game changer. Sanctions would come back automatically, oil sales blocked, missile trade cut off, billions that fuel Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis dried up. But let's be honest, that's not Europe's intention. This is not about bringing the Islamic Republic to its knees. It's about dragging them back to yet another round of talks. Germany's foreign minister even said it openly. This is only the start of negotiations. What does that really mean? That the regime is once again being rewarded with more time? Here's how the snapback mechanism works. Snapback starts a 30-day clock. If the Security Council passes a resolution to block sanctions and nobody uses their veto, the sanctions disappear. That's it. The only countries who can stop that are the United States, the United Kingdom, and France. And if they fail to act, the regime escapes consequences yet again. The timing also tells you everything. This happened in the middle of summer when most governments are on recess, public scrutiny is a little bit lower, and we've seen this tactic before. In 2023, $6 billion were released to Tehran during that break. And what followed? October 7th, human rights abuses in Iran, assassination plots in Europe and America, hostages tortured and killed, all bankrolled by the same regime that was supposed to be contained. Now we're back at the same crossroads. 30 days to decide if sanctions will be enforced or if the West will once again fall for empty promises. This is not a technical debate. It is a choice. Do we cut off the lifelines of terror or do we fund them? Do we confront the regime or do we enable it? The next month will determine not just the future of Iran, but the security of the Middle East and ultimately the West. President Trump, we need that veto. Well, lots happening this week around the world and, of course, here in the Middle East. But first, let's zoom in on this absolutely crazy story from Yale University making headlines for all the wrong reasons. So this week, an Iranian student at Yale revealed that the former Biden administration's special envoy on Iran, Rob Malley, will be teaching a course on U.S.-Iran relations this fall. And boy, does he have an interesting lineup of guest speakers. Now, Malley was a key architect of the 2015 Iran deal, and he's currently on unpaid leave after his security clearance was revoked in 2023 amid an FBI investigation into his mishandling of classified material. At Yale, apparently that gets you a teaching gig. So this course, titled Adversaries by Design, Deconstructing the Iran-U.S. Relationship, is set for fall 2025, and it is described as examining more than 4 decades of tension between Washington and Tehran. The description also states that it intends to place students in the shoes of U.S. and Iranian decision makers. I wonder if that includes executions and shooting out the eyes of teenage protesters like in Iran, or maybe poisoning schoolgirls, beating women for removing hijab, mass arrests and false accusations of being Mossad spies. Probably not, but course materials do include role-play assignments where students cosplay as diplomats of the regime, so we'll have to see how that goes. The syllabus also features guest lecturers such as Ali Vaiz, a known shill of the Islamic Republic, Hossein Mousavian, a former ambassador of the regime, and Mohammad Javad Zarif, the former foreign minister of the Islamic Republic. Why on earth is Yale allowing Islamic regime terrorists to lecture students on campus? Instead of educating about radicalism of the regime, Yale is instead normalizing the regime, the very regime which jails, tortures, and executes dissidents. Take Hossein Mousavian, for example. He is implicated in the disappearance and murder of dozens of Iranian dissident activists while serving as the regime's ambassador to Germany. He should be on trial, not lecturing to American students. Yale's willingness to hand a megaphone to regime loyalists and their apologists is really an insult to dissidents who have risked everything for their freedoms, some of whom are sitting in those classrooms. Yale should be called out for allowing its campus to be turned into this platform, really for tyranny. Well, next up, we're going down under as Australia has just drawn a red line with the Islamic Republic of Iran. In an unprecedented move, Canberra has expelled the Islamic Republic's ambassador and 3 diplomats, closed its embassy in Tehran, and announced it will formally designate the IRGC as a terrorist organization. About time. Now, just so you understand the gravity of this is the first diplomatic expulsion of its kind by Australia since World War II. And why? Because the Islamic Republic of Iran was caught red-handed. Australia's intelligence agency uncovered the regime's funding trail behind a string of anti-Semitic attacks targeting Australian Jews. A synagogue firebombed in Melbourne, while a kosher deli was attacked in Sydney, and all of it traced back to the networks controlled by the Islamic Republic. Meanwhile, Australia's anti-Semitism problem continues to reach a boiling point. Reports continue to show skyrocketing anti-Semitism even amongst the mainstream Australian population, and the endless Free Palestine rallies have been filled with signs of Ayatollah Khamenei, ISIS and Hamas flags, and of course, unrepentant Jew hatred. Now, as your reminder, these rallies are not pro-Palestinian. They are pro-terror. However, when it comes to the Australian government, despite the recent diplomatic spat with Israel over recognition of a Palestinian state, Australia is setting an example for the West with their actions on Iran. The Islamic Republic of Iran is not just a regional menace, it's a global one, orchestrating attacks all over the world, not to mention fundamentally they're anti-Semitic. Remember that this is the same regime that sponsors a Holocaust cartoon contest. It's time for the rest of the West to follow suit and expel the Islamic Republic ambassadors, designate the IRGC a terror group if they have not already, and cut off relations with the world's biggest sponsors of global terror. Well, joining us today to speak about that situation in Australia and the latest developments is someone who's become a major inspiration to many for her courageous pursuit of truth and outspoken work against anti-Semitism. Erin Molan is a prolific Australian journalist, a renowned speaker, and the host of The Erin Molan Show. Since October 7th, Erin has made headlines with her powerful monologues of bold statements against extremism, both in Australia and beyond, and her moral clarity on the Israeli-Arab conflict has inspired thousands. Erin, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a great honor to have you on Axis of Truth. I'd really like to start off by hearing your response to the latest news of the anti-Semitic attacks in Australia being orchestrated by the Islamic Republic of Iran. I mean, are you surprised? Are everyday Australians surprised at the regime's coordinated attacks on the Jewish community?
I think if you're surprised by the involvement of the Iranian regime, then you've been living under a rock. I think if you're in government or a position of power in Australia and you are surprised, then you should hang your head in shame. I don't sense any feelings of relief from the Jewish community or the broader community who care about the values that I do or the things that Australia stands for or maybe used to stand for much more strongly. This is a terrorist regime. This is a terrorist regime that inflicts evil upon the world. So why would they ever have any hesitancy in doing so on Australian soil? Of course not. So no, I wasn't surprised at all. I have no doubt that it goes much deeper than that they are responsible for other incidents as well. And I think, regardless of how weak our government has been since October 7, and they have been, my gosh, they have been weak, it was the right move to kick the ambassador out. And I say it like that because I don't recognize the legitimacy of that government to have had an ambassador in our country, but it doesn't reverse the damage that they have done with unbelievably weak leadership that has let this country down, let Israel down, let the Western world who cares about democracy, freedom, peace, and hope down massively.
The diplomatic moves announced in response to these attacks are something that a lot of Iranians have actually lobbied for inside of Australia. I myself met with lawmakers in Australia to lobby on the issue of the IRGC terror designation when I was in Australia. What has the reaction so far been from Australians or even from Iranian Australians? I mean, do they comprehend the threat of the regime, or it hasn't really fully registered?
It's a great question. And, I'm someone who's deeply entrenched in this world because I choose to be. I feel like I live and breathe this to probably an extent that is not healthy. But I look at my family group chat, for example, and I have sisters and a brother who's a pilot, a lawyer, a school principal. So, a pretty diverse group of people. And for them, this is not front of mind. For most Australians, this is how I always think about it. I think about a single mum who lives out in Western Sydney. The conflict in the Middle East feels far away. And even when it's on our soil, like it is with the attacks on, the synagogue and a restaurant, and when there are headlines regarding the Iranian regime, people still seem to think it's either very far away or it doesn't directly impact them. And I think that's one of the issues that we have in this country and in a lot of Western countries. Unlike myself, who understands very, very clearly the threat that exists and the fact that this threat is not just toward the Jewish people, that this threat is towards all of us who believe in, again, peace, democracy, freedom. I think most Australians feel very far away and don't properly comprehend what is coming. Not what is coming, what is already here. The ideology of the Iranian regime is one of the greatest threats, and it is here and it is growing and it is building. So look, in terms of the notice that people here took, no. Have people, people will stop me in the street quite often. A lot of people in the area I live are Jewish, so we talk about it. But everyday Australians, I used to host football, will stop me and talk about rugby league, or will stop, people are not engaged in this in a way that I believe they need to be. And I'm hoping that will shift and change, because we need Australians engaged so we can put a government in place who will do what is necessary for us to fight this evil. But at the moment, if I'm being completely honest with you, it's not that Australians are stupid. They're definitely not. They're very intelligent people. But again, we're far away and a lot of people don't understand the threat just yet.
Of course, we see that false sense of security in Canada and the United States and Europe as well. So it's par for the course for many Western countries now. I want to shift a little bit and ask you about anti-Semitism. I mean, we hear about it a lot in Australia. How bad has the anti-Semitism situation gotten? And what has the response of the government been? I know that a few months ago they had proposed a plan, the special envoy for dealing with anti-Semitism. But what is actually being done, if anything?
So I went and visited the mosque that the Iranians were directly behind in Melbourne just this week. I went and had a look, and it's still essentially blown to smithereens. The extent of damage to that is sickening. I walk my daughter to school every morning, and again in a community that has a fairly significant Jewish population, and nobody is relaxed. It's an insane feeling to live in a country like Australia and to feel as a minority that you are not safe. Even just this past weekend, I live maybe 5 minutes from Bondi Beach. How blessed I am. There was a demonstration. There were pamphlets and leaflets going around advertising a pro-Palestinian demonstration there in the heart of the eastern suburbs. People didn't want to go outside. You look at neo-Nazis who took part in the otherwise what looked to be a fairly well-behaved March for Australia where people were waving the Australian flag, and you then have psychopathic Nazis there. I look, Emily, at the Opera House 2 days after October 7 as the first moment I felt ashamed of my country. And I look at what occurred on that day, not so much the behaviour of these malicious few who celebrated a slaughter of innocent people, who chanted for death and evil and used hate speech, not free speech, hate speech. It's a very different thing. And I look at that as a watershed moment for this country. And this was our chance as a nation, and any culture of a country, a business, an organisation is set from the top down. This was our watershed moment to come out as a nation and say, we do not tolerate that. Not on this land. Not in this nation. My dad did not go to war, and our forefathers did not give their lives to fight for the freedoms that exist here for people, terrorist supporters, to celebrate slaughter on our land in front of our landmark. But we didn't. You know, the government said their little bits and pieces that, to be honest, were weak. They did nothing. Did any of those people who incited hate, who called for violence, end up in jail? Of course not. Did any of them pay a price? So the people in Australia who are malicious, who are anti-Semitic, who have hate in their heart, who are useful idiots, who are uneducated, whatever you want to call them, looked at that and went, okay, this is a test case. None of them paid a price. If we'd come down hard and said no, then we wouldn't have seen 90% of what has occurred since. And that to me was a moment for us to determine as a people what we accept. And I think in any country, you look at Europe, you look at America, you look at the UK, there are always going to be elements of evil in any society. But it's when the vast majority of good, decent people don't stand up against it that I get worried. You don't worry about the elements of evil, they will always exist. What I worried deeply about on that day was the silence of the majority here in Australia. That worried me. And that's when I went, okay, this is much more significant and deeper than I had realized.
I think we're seeing similar phenomenons all around the world. You know, the response to October 7th has really been appalling, even for me, who has worked in the space for many years. I want to ask you a little bit more about the current government in Australia. 3 weeks ago, we saw that the Prime Minister Albanese stated that the government does intend to recognize a Palestinian state at the UN later this month. What do you think of this move by the government? I mean, how do you think the government has been on the war overall since October 7th? I know you've talked about the protests, but overall as a policy.
Oh, they have been appalling. They have legitimized almost every Hamas lie that has come out, every bit of propaganda that comes directly from the mouths of terrorists. Our government has treated as legitimate factual information. So the rest of the country who are not living this day to day, look to them for leadership. Look to them for what is occurring far, far away. And when a government, an elected government, gives legitimacy to terrorist lies, you're in trouble. The rewarding of October 7, which is exactly what they have done. I'm not mincing my words here. They have essentially said, congratulations to you, Hamas. Congratulations. Job well done. Tick, here you go. It's one of the most shameful moments of our nation's history and will be. It was an appalling decision. It didn't surprise me in the slightest, given the rhetoric and the lead up and given the failure of our leaders to show any genuine, not even courage. Why does it require courage to come out and condemn terrorism and stand for the innocent victims of it? Why should any leader in the West require moral courage to stand with Israel and to oppose the terrorists?
I mean, do you think that the government views Palestinian state recognition as sort of a bone for the extremists in the Australian society? Do they think that this will quell some of those protests and that animosity that we're seeing?
Look, absolutely. But our Prime Minister was part of those exact protests when he was at university.
Yeah.
There are photos of him waving the flag. This is what he believes. The people who marched across the Harbour Bridge, again, shame. These photos and these images spread across the world with placards of the...
I wanted to actually ask you about that because in addition to the anti-Semitic attacks, Australia has had a lot of really alarming scenes at these anti-Israel protests. And I say anti-Israel because they are not pro-Palestinian. I know that
of course they're not. Not even a little bit. And I say they're pro-Hamas, they're anti-Israel. It's, you don't chant for death if you care about kids in Palestine. You don't hold up an ISIS flag if you care for kids in Palestine. You don't hold up the face of the Islamic regime leader, the man responsible for so much death and suffering more in Gaza than anywhere else in the world. If you care about kids in Gaza, you don't chant death, death to the IDF if you care about kids in Gaza, because currently there's only one group of people actually trying to free them from the terrorists, and that's the IDF, the terrorists responsible for all their pain and suffering. It's been an appalling reaction. I still, and I may be naive, and I don't know if I'm losing hope in this, but I genuinely still cling on to the belief that the vast majority of Australians do believe in decency and do oppose terrorism, absolutely. But when their leader is so compromised, and when the media in this country is so compromised, I watch stories. I watched a story of a hostage/prisoner exchange and the start of a story on commercial television in Australia. It began with this line, and it had an image of a Palestinian man who had just been released out of a prison in Israel, on the shoulders of his brother, and his mother's there crying, and the narrator says, a family reunion, decades in the making, and there's tears streaming and people are happy. And if I'm, fat, dumb and happy here in Australia, and that's a saying, I'm not being specific, but I'm going, oh, that's so beautiful. They're back together, those awful Israelis. What they don't tell you is that he blew up a bus and killed kids. It's the omitted. So I'm not, and that's not the ABC, by the way, a very left-leaning, our government broadcaster that you wouldn't expect any kind of straight down the line reporting from. These are our commercial networks. So when that is your highest rating news program that vast majority of people in Australia watch, there's two networks who do the 6 p.m. news. If that is the opening segment and then it's, and a hostage was released and let's do a quick shot and let's move on. How do you expect people in Australia, do you think they're going to be able to, they don't have the capacity like I do to research and read every day and go to Israel. They're working, they're tired, they're not evil, but they consume what they can and they're trying to make their, cost of living crisis is exhausting. They're trying to make ends meet. Their husbands are, and all, like everyone's got their issues. They can't invest, so they're reliant upon our government and they're reliant upon our news services to give them factual information, and that is not occurring.
I want to ask you about the police and the security in Australia. I mean, you mentioned the signs, the ISIS flags, the Hamas flags, photo of Ayatollah Khamenei, even we saw at this Sydney Harbour protest. Is anything being done about this support for terror? I mean, is it even illegal in Australia? And is it being enforced at all? So it is illegal.
It's definitely illegal. Absolutely. Is it being enforced? No. And this is, and I don't necessarily put that blame onto police. They've got an incredibly tough job. But you might remember outside the Sydney Opera House, and this might help you set the scene for everything that's occurred since, outside the Sydney Opera House, a lone Jewish man with an Israeli flag, because originally the Jewish community in Australia were going to the Opera House to mourn, to gather and mourn, because they were in as much shock as anyone else all over the world. They got told to stay home because this mob were coming. So instead of our police saying, no, we will protect your right to gather and mourn, they said, stay home, it won't be safe because the other mob are coming. Even just on the weekend, I'm looking at a vision on social media of police moving on safe, peaceful people with Israeli flags and Australian flags connected, because there's a pro-Palestinian, we know it's not, march coming their way. And I think I understand the police want to avoid violence, but we can't live in fear, and we can't hide, and we can't protect their right to maybe be violent if they think so, or we can't focus all our law enforcement efforts on removing anyone that might make them violent. That's not how it works. That's not Australia. We protect the right of people who want to protest peacefully. We protect that. We don't tell people to stay away because we're worried another mob will be violent. If they're going to be violent, and we're so sure they're going to be violent, Australia should be stopping them, not the others. And that's been one of the biggest issues.
It's an issue across the board. I mean, a similar phenomenon I saw myself in London at the same protest. The police will remove the pro-Israel protesters from the situation rather than actually
calling
holding
them agitators.
Exactly.
Or something. Even 3 girlfriends and I on that, 100,000 or whatever they said there were people on the Harbour Bridge, we went and held up because I thought there is no way in hell I'm going to let a march for humanity go all over the world without us at least trying to put those who actually deserve people's humanity, the hostages. And so we held up the signs and we were asked to leave. And you just go, come on. We stood there holding up hostages, starving, emaciated hostages. It's upside down, it's backwards, and why it still angers me or surprises me, I don't know, because I should just expect it, but my heart wants better.
I think it's because it's ongoing. We're all dealing with this same fatigue. I want to change gears just a little bit and ask you about your personal experience, because you became very vocal on the Israel issue not long after October 7th. What was it about this issue that kind of captured your attention and made you want to speak out about this issue?
For me, it wasn't even a let me think about what the consequences might be, because not for a million years would I ever have envisaged that I would come out after October 7, be vehemently opposed to the terrorists and staunchly standing alongside the victims. Would I have ever thought in a million years that that would be considered controversial in my country? But there you go. It wasn't a decision I came to. I went on. I said exactly what I thought. That was my job. I was a commentator. I went on and talked about world events. And then the backlash was so severe and significant, I had to give my little girl to her dad for a period because the death threats were so intense and the legitimacy of them so serious. I went back on my show the next week. I did a weekly show and I went harder. And for me, there was not a second where I thought, do I pull back a little bit on this because this is awful. The reaction actually made me realize how much more important it was for me to go harder. And there was one image I saw and I mean, no one should need any more than one image from October 7 to understand who is on the right side and who is on the wrong side in this. But there was one image of a woman being dragged by her hair to a car. And for me, as someone who had gone through a violent relationship myself many years ago and had only just shared my story for the first time, the reporter who'd done my story in Australia had gone and spoken to a friend of mine who I'd fallen out with back then because she'd gone to the police. And when you're in that relationship, you don't want anyone to do that. And they'd interviewed her, and I wasn't aware of this, but she'd spoken about watching my partner at the time drag me by my hair into a car when I was very young. And that was, for me, it felt very personal. And I just started going through my own journey of trying to heal from such horror. And I remember thinking, I then found safety and was able to heal with people around me. How the hell is this beautiful woman going to go through what she's just gone through and then go to a tunnel for hundreds of days, and there are still people in tunnels? And I think that for me was, I've been through some horrors in my life, but I have been able to go to the arms of my family who love me straight away almost afterwards. And the thought of people going through horrors and then being kept by those who perpetrate the horrors in tunnels, I think hit me on a very personal level. But again, I say, nothing personal needed to occur for me to understand very, very quickly and very easily that one side was immensely evil and the other side were not.
I want to end on something positive, actually. I would love to hear from you why you think, in your words, that Australians should stand with Israel, and also how we in Israel can expand our support for Australians where we do have shared struggles, such as the fight against terrorism.
I think it just makes so much sense to me when you take away the propaganda and you take away, this clearly, it's not effective on me, but clearly very effective mass media campaign that is funded by the Iranian regime, by Qatar, by so many nations that wish us harm. I look at that and I think, put all that to the side. We believe in the same things Israel does. We value the same things Israel does. We have tolerance. We are multicultural. So is Israel. It's one of the most multicultural places I've ever been. I went to visit the Western Wall, and I saw an IDF soldier and another IDF soldier stopping outside of the mosque. One went inside while the other guy, the Jewish guy wearing a kippah, held his boots. He was obviously Muslim, went inside to pray, came back out, put his hand on the shoulder of the Jewish IDF soldier who handed him his boots. He then put his boots on while he was leaning on him. Then they walked off into the distance chatting and laughing. And I looked and I went, that is Israel. That is Israel. And that is Australia. We have an incredibly diverse, amazing group of people who, most of whom, the vast majority of whom, have come to this nation and bought into the kind of life that they left their own nations to find here. And I look at, there are so many similarities. And look, if you want to get really basic, if that's too complex for you, one side are terrorists who slaughter, kill, butcher, rape, murder, you name it. The other side just want peace. Haven't started wars, don't want wars, just want to live in peace. I think it's a very simple decision for Australians as to who they stand with.
All right. Well, we do have to wrap up. I know I've kept you here longer than I promised, but I want to thank you for joining us today and for all the work that you do. You're a very, very important voice in the darkness of the media hellscape that exists today. Thank you for everything that you do, Erin.
And Emily, thank you for everything you do. You are incredible. You were one of the first people that I saw and I went, wow, you are amazing. I've learned so much from your reports.
It's mutual.
And well, it's insane that you should have to thank me for telling the truth, but I now see how rare that is. It's an honor to stand with your people, and I will do so for the rest of my life. So thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And now, before we wrap up, we have our usual good, bad, and ugly. First things first, the good news this week. Israel just served up a fresh batch of Yemeni cutlet, a reminder that Houthi leaders can't hide forever. An IDF airstrike in Sana'a wiped out Ahmed al-Rahawi, the Houthi prime minister, along with multiple other Houthi ministers. Israeli assessments say they may even have taken out the entire cabinet in one blow. This strike hit during a closed-door meeting of top Houthi officials, showing that Israeli intelligence is tracking them down to the room and the minute. Remember, these are the same Houthis launching missiles, drones, and cluster bombs at Israeli cities. Consider this payback with precision and a warning that more is coming. And now our bad story of the week, Turkey. Turkey's dictator Erdogan is thrashing again over Prime Minister Netanyahu's recognition of the Armenian genocide, as well as an IDF operation to disable Turkish-sponsored spy tech in Syria. On Friday, he dramatically declared that Turkey is cutting off all relations with Israel and blocking its airspace for Israeli flights. However, the Turkish Foreign Ministry quietly admitted shortly after that only official flights or flights carrying weapons, would actually be impacted. Commercial airlines are not impacted. Beyond the hot air from Erdogan, Turkey's moves and their aggression in Syria are what really matter here to Israeli security. Turkish forces have stepped up attacks in northern Syria, hitting Kurdish regions, striking civilian infrastructure, and advancing Erdogan's delusional pursuit of an Ottoman Empire. Now, this escalation is not just a Syria problem. Of course, it threatens Israeli security directly. And as we have seen so far, the IDF will not tolerate Turkey's increased aggression in the region, nor will they sit quietly while Erdogan attempts to rewrite the map of the Middle East. And now our ugly story of the week. There's this vile individual in Canada who apparently is suffering from advanced stage brain rot based on the profound stupidity of his recent Jew-hating statements. Ali Badshah, a Pakistani-Canadian actor, has repeatedly and explicitly supported the Islamic Republic, called for putting Zionists in the ground, and has been recording heinous anti-Semitic videos to the Jewish community. Not Israeli, Jewish. Take a look.
The problem is bigger than Zionism. It's Jewish supremacy. You got to wonder, why are these people always like, I'm so scared. I'm so scared of what's going to happen to us. Our community is so scared. Your community is really scared right now because deep down, you all know how deeply racist and evil you are. You all know that you view the rest of us like cattle. You all know that you're killing us en masse right now in Palestine with no regard. You don't even see us as humans. That's why you're so scared, because you think that when the world finds out, and it is finding out, that we're going to turn on you and do to you what you've done to us. But no, here's the difference. We're actually human beings.
Now, some people might watch that and be saying, why give it attention? You're only increasing the impact. But the truth is that in Canada right now, so many of my friends and colleagues have pointed out that they don't even feel the police are on their side when it comes to taking hate crimes against Jews seriously. Despite that, attacks on Canadian Jews continue to rise, and Ali here appears to be calling for more. This should not go unaddressed. It should not be normalized, and it is not criticism of Israel. It's blatant Jew hatred, and it needs to be stopped by the authorities before more attacks take place. Canadian Jews should not have to live in fear because of the tolerance of intolerance. Well, that's a wrap for this week on Axis of Truth. Of course, we'll be back next week, as always, with more discussions and stories from the Middle East to the West. I'm Emily Schrader. Be sure to follow me on social media, Emily K. Schrader or Emily in Tel Aviv. And thank you for watching. See you next week on Axis of Truth, only on JNS.